What do you believe right now that's making you feel this way? And when you analyse it, you realise how irrational you can be at times.
Every single one of our major customers and minor customers all shut their doors overnight.
It's not sales per se, but the outcome of it is, because people get to know you, they get to see you.
But, what's the culture like at the business? What do we stand for, the values?
I've got to tick that box on my personal development programme I don't really want to be here.
Scaling up a business isn't easy. If it were, we wouldn't have less than 4% of businesses scaling beyond 10 employees or around £1 million turnover level, and less than 1% beyond 50 employees. But the contribution that we make as owner-managers to our economies is immense and should never be underestimated. Yet it can be a tough gig for all of us at times, and only other business owners truly understand the challenges that we face. And through ScaleUp Radio, we aim to help make things a little easier. We interview guests who have been where you are now and may have faced some of the challenges that you are facing. And they offer their thoughts and advice on what has worked for them, as well as what didn't. And we've also combined many of the lessons from these interviews, and also through working with hundreds of owner managers over the last 10 years or so, into a practical scale-up handbook that we've called the Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System, or ESUS. And it's for owner managers like you and me as we navigate our own scale-up journey. And you can order a copy through your favourite online book retailer, or by going to all the W's, esusgroup.co.uk, www.esusgroup.co.uk. This time on ScaleUp Radio, we look at one of our monthly themes, and this time around, it's lifetime value and the ratio to customer acquisition cost, or you may have heard them referred to as LTV to CAC. CAC. So if you haven't heard about it, or even if you have and you want to know a little bit more, then this is a great session. We've also got a presentation within it from Jeremy Strong of Invoco Telecom, and he looks at exactly how he's used the concept within his business, and he picks out some really useful points. And this is a ratio that we really need to be thinking about looking at within our businesses, whatever kind of business that we've got. And even if we're not necessarily calculating that ratio to the exact decimal place, but that we're thinking about what it means and how we can impact and generally look to increase that ratio of LTV to CAC. So lots of things to think about within this session. And if you want to check your thinking on whether you're managing your cash and creating value within your business, then there's a great little checklist that we put together that we'll put in the show notes that you could try, and it'll give you some great ideas as to why and how you might be able to level up your strategic thinking around managing for value. This time around, we're looking at lifetime value, and that comes from the valuable growth section of the wheel there in the cash pillar. And it's part of that. How do we make sure that as we grow our businesses, we're thinking of value and not just simply of short-term profitability, but that we're creating long-term value. And so part of lifetime value, or part of valuable growth, is thinking about customer lifetime value. And can define value in many ways, but one simple way to look at it is that for every amount that we spend on acquiring a customer, that we're bringing in a multiple of that in terms of our lifetime value. And a rule of thumb ratio that is increasingly used, and it is particularly with recurring revenue type businesses and SaaS type businesses, is that the lifetime value of your customers should be at least 3 times the cost of acquiring them. And that's known as that LTV to CAC ratio. So LTV, lifetime value, CAC, customer acquisition cost. So that's broadly speaking what it's about, but it's not just about for recurring revenue businesses. So why is it important? Well, there's a few key things. First of all, you can't improve what we don't measure. We know that. Once you start measuring lifetime value and start thinking about it and breaking it down into the components of what drives that lifetime value, then that enables us to think about employing specific strategies around maybe things like pricing, sales, but segmentation, but frequency of purchase, the cost of sales, but also particularly things like customer retention, and building ultimately a more valuable business by making it more scalable and stable and resilient, increasing that profitability. It also means that we're likely to, if we focus on it, it should help improve our decision-making on customer acquisition. What you learn from typical customer, from segmentation, and thinking about the more profitable customers, the ones that do lead to a higher lifetime value perhaps than others. And it then feeds into improving things like forecasting, because it will then help us to make better forecasts. We've got a relatively good long-term view as to what's likely to happen with the lifetime value of the customers. So it should help us in all sorts of aspects beyond just simply working out that number ratio. And an out of balance business model is what we see quite a lot, and actually slightly out of focus as well. Looking at that slide, but an out of balance business model sort of comes when that cost to acquire a customer is that much greater than the monetization of it, than that lifetime value. So hopefully this is not a position that we're in. And so when I go through this, I am going to pull up a formula or two. So it might look a little bit mathematical, but just again, everything about this is important about thinking, what does that formula mean? What does that mean that we can think about to help to improve the ratios within it? So those of you that are perhaps less mathematically inclined from others, don't worry about that. Just think about the implications that it has. So we're looking for the idea that the lifetime value is at least 3 times the customer acquisition. But why do we get into that sometimes that out of balance where it's not quite right? And the part of the reason is that a lot of our efforts are focused, and we see this a lot, are focused on acquiring a customer. So all this stuff here, we're generating awareness, attracting customers, we're nurturing them, we're trying to convert them, do negotiation, and then we've won that deal, and then we go back and we start again, and we get new customers, and it's all about that, or a lot of it's about that first transaction. And of course, that's a difficult model to replicate and to make work. And what we sometimes are missing out on is the fact that a lot of this extra value will come from the clients that we've already won, and then making sure that we develop those over time and we retain them, we get them coming back as frequently as possible, and we're expanding that business. And a good example that drove that home to me recently was a classmate of mine from when I did my MBA. He runs a business called Evotix. When he took that business over, the annual value of each customer was about £2,000, and he increased that to £20,000 per customer over a period of about 4 years by focusing on developing those relationships primarily with the customers. So where they were in one particular corner of a company, how can they branch out into other divisions of the company and grow that side of things? So thinking about that lifetime value and how it can nurture clients is, at the end of the day, a lot of what this is around. So there's that basic formula. Our lifetime value to CAC, customer acquisition cost ratio, is the one divided by the other. And just a little rub, lifetime value is not just the revenues that we're going to get from that customer, but we need to put an element of gross margin on that as well, or contribution margin, as you'll hear in a moment, where what's it cost to service that customer, so that we've actually got a contribution that's worth for that lifetime value, not just the customer acquisition cost. So here we go. Here comes the bit of maths for us. So lifetime value, average transaction value. So what's the average sale, the value of each transaction that you get from a customer, times the average number of transactions in a period. So if we're looking at it, say, over a year, how many transactions in a year, times the number of years, so the retention period that we're likely to keep that customer for, times that contribution margin, which should take into account not just the direct cost of sales, but any, if you don't include your time in servicing those customers, then you should. So that's the basic formula. So transaction value times the number of transactions times the length of time that you keep them for, and that contribution margin. All right. So that's that side of things. And then the customer acquisition cost is your total sales and marketing costs in a period divided by the average number of transactions in that period. So if we spent £100,000 on sales and marketing in that period, I wish, and we've made a certain number of sales, acquired a certain number of new customers, that should be average number of new customers that are in there. Then that means that we've so if we've got spent £100,000 and we've got 1,000 new customers, then it's £100 per acquisition. So we think about simple example of it. If average transaction value is £50, 12 transactions in a year, 7 years on average to keep them, and maybe it's a 50% contribution margin, then the lifetime value of that customer is about £2,100. If we then calculate the cost of acquiring that customer, if we've made £12,000 worth of sales and we've acquired 24 new customers, then that means that we've got an average customer acquisition cost of 500, which if we then divide the two together, we end up with a 4.2 ratio. All right. So there's the maths, but what does that make us? What does that make us think about? So some of the factors that we need to be thinking about. So what are the advantages of lifetime value, or the things that we need to be thinking about? So first of all, about improving that customer retention, because the length of time that we keep people for is one of the biggest factors in the lifetime value. So avoiding customer attrition or churn is what we really want to be doing. We also want to be thinking about driving repeat sales. So you can use lifetime value to track the average number of visits over a year, over the customer lifetime, and use that to strategize and think of ways that we can drive the repeat business side of things. So obviously, if we've got a recurring revenue model, that's one aspect of it. How can we increase that? If we don't have a recurring revenue model, a subscription type model, how can we get a customer coming back for repeat business and bake it into the offer, for example? How can we encourage higher value sales as well? So because a key component of that formula is the average transaction value. So how can we find ways to increase that order value? And then also think about the margin, of course, so that whether it's the gross margin or that contribution margin. So how can we make sure that we can maximize the margin within that? And then in terms of increasing our effectiveness of our sales and marketing activities in that customer acquisition cost, how can we make sure, what could we do to improve the ratio of the number of customers that we're getting for the amount that we're spending? And this is where segmentation might come into. We might find that we're more successful with certain customer groups in acquiring those, and if that matches in as well, that they're better from a long-term retention point of view, then happy days. But thinking about it in that way should help us to start thinking about, okay, where's our marketing being most effective, and maybe that's where we should focus. And just looking at that, and in terms of putting it onto some kind of the back on that balance here again, if we look on the right hand side here, some of the things that are not so good that we want to work on improving are the churn rates and customer satisfaction. We want to make sure that is as good as possible. Otherwise, that's tipping the balance in the wrong way. And if we're looking at the green arrow moving up here, how can we make sure we're getting that recurring revenue, the scalable pricing, looking for opportunities to upsell? But there's lots of other things that we might think about once we start to get into this, and that's part of the trick, is to have a quick look at those drivers and think, okay, well, what sort of things could we do to impact on improving the lifetime value and reducing the customer acquisition cost? And those of you that have been working with us for a little while and coming to ScaleUp Club will know we've talked before about things like the 7 financial levers and the cash conversion cycle, and it hooks right back into those as well, and thinking each each 90 days, what's an improvement that we could do around that cash area? So could there be a lifetime value type improvement that we could start to focus on over the next 90 days that might really make a difference in the long term to our business? So that essentially is what it's about. It doesn't matter whether it's a recurring revenue type business or not. We can be thinking about how we can make improvements to improve that lifetime value. If we have got a recurring revenue business, then there's a slight difference to it, and that typically then that gives us, if we know that every month people are coming in and buying our service, then we can use that monthly recurring revenue as that transaction value, essentially, multiply it by the contribution margin. But instead of guessing or tracking over years the lifetime value, we can divide by the churn rate. So if we know that we're losing 10% of customers every month, then we would divide by that 0.1, because that essentially, if that's our average churn rate, that essentially dividing by 0.1 means that on average we've got a 10-month lifespan with each business. So we would it's a simpler formula, and it shows the impact of churn rate, because obviously if you can reduce that 10% to 5%, then essentially you double the lifetime value of that customer, because you're doubling the amount of time that they're likely to stay with us. So that's lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. So a couple of key takeaways. It's lifetime value is that measure of the average customer's gross margin contribution that's generated over the entire relationship with us. Comparing it to the customer acquisition cost is a really practical. It's relatively straightforward to do. There's some complications in some of the detail, but it's a relatively practical thing to do in estimating the company's scalability. It gives us a really good measure as to whether that business model is in fact scalable, or whether we're just going to end up really with a hand-to-mouth business and it's going to struggle on the growth. And it also gives us an understanding and a focus on LTV and CAC, gives us that understanding and can yield significant insights into those strategies and tactics that we can use to improve that ratio over time. So that's all about lifetime value and customer acquisition cost. We'll open up some questions in a minute, but first I'd like to introduce Jeremy Strong of Invoco Telecoms to just put a little bit of real business experience on some of those aspects that I've been talking about. So Jeremy is somebody that we've been working with for a little while. He's doing some great things at Invoco Telecoms. He knows his numbers inside out, and has been thinking about elements of the lifetime value for a little while and building it into his business. So Jeremy, I'm going to hand over to you if that's all right.
Thanks for that, Kevin. And as Kevin kind of mentioned, we've been working on, we're looking at customer lifetime value in our business for quite a while now. But before we're talking about customer lifetime value, I'm going to talk about marketing to begin with. So in my kind of simplistic brain, my definition of marketing, another equation, unfortunately, marketing equals creativity plus maths. Now, many of us might have the ability to do the creativity piece in-house, but the good news is that if you don't have that creativity, then there's plenty of outsourced marketing agencies that you can outsource that activity to. The maths part of the equation, the business maths around marketing, is less easy to outsource because it requires having systems and processes in place in order to be able to measure things like return on investment and all that kind of stuff. So that piece of the jigsaw is quite difficult to outsource. And I think that's something, because particularly small business owners, we tend to kind of struggle with a little bit. So here's an example from my distant past of bad maths. So when we first started doing Google Ads, when we launched our kind of B2B products about 7 years or so ago, we started doing some Google Ads campaigns on virtual numbers. Now, virtual numbers were characterized by being a very low-cost service, kind of roughly about £1 a month, and they're contract-free, so customers can cancel their services at any time. Now, at that stage, I wish it was still like this now, but at that stage, it was roughly between 12 and 30 pence per click on those Google Ads to drive people to our website. But we weren't really tracking conversions particularly well. Now, from my perspective, I knew intuitively, although we weren't tracking it particularly well, if we were spending £400 every month, we'd get roughly 40 to 60 new customers every month in, month out. So we were spending £400, no more, no less, and it became just an overhead that we were happy to spend as long as the customer numbers were growing. However, one of our other products, which is our player-based phone systems, which is a really important product for us because it contributes about 80% of the margin of our business. It's a higher value product, but again, still a low starting point at £3 a month. And it, again, contract free, so customers can cancel at any point in time. Now, that was costing us between £8 and £10 a click, so that's a different kind of beast entirely. And we were estimating up to £120 to acquire a new customer. Now, at that stage, thinking of, if I'm looking at spending £120 to acquire a customer that may only ever spend £3 before cancelling after 30 days, for me, that's a complete non-starter. Totally uncomfortable with that idea. Just thought, well, ultimately, that's too expensive for us to do. So we stopped doing advertising on that product completely, which really kind of, as our biggest value product, a really stupid thing to do. Marketing was just far too risky, and we just decided to stop it. And that was because we had no understanding at that point in time of the customer lifetime value. Now, as Kevin kind of pointed out, the formula for lifetime value is pretty straightforward and pretty intuitive, and this was the formula that I was aware of. Now, the good thing about this is most of the data in this formula is pretty easily extractable from your accounting software. So average transaction value, average number of transactions, contribution margin, and so on. That should be pretty easy to get from your accountancy package. And if not, I'm sure your accountant or bookkeeper will be able to extract that information for you. The difficulty in this piece of the equation that I didn't understand or couldn't really get my head around was the retention period, particularly as we were offering, bringing new products to market. I just simply didn't know whether the customer was going to be a customer for 6 months or 6 years. And that obviously makes a massive difference to the customer lifetime value. So because I didn't feel like we could measure that metric particularly well, we just stopped trying to measure it because we didn't know what the retention period would be. Fortunately, working with Kevin, we've realised for recurring revenue businesses, there is a different formula, which is the average monthly recurring revenue per customer times the contribution margin divided by churn rate. Now, at that point in time, churn rate wasn't something that we were actively measuring, but it was something that we could measure. So we kind of started developing systems to do that. So what we do every month now, we did a bit of work under the hood. I'm not going to lie, it was a little bit of a project to do. But now when we run our monthly billing run every month, we insert all of that data into our cloud-based dashboarding software, which we use for all of our KPI systems, which is Sife. Now, Sife is fantastic, but there are plenty of other alternatives out there, all broadly do the same kind of thing. But the nice thing is now we've done the work for this. That data is inserted into the system on an automated basis every month, and we can kind of track that data over time. So the first thing we're measuring now, which we weren't before, was the revenue churn rate, and we break that down by individual product. Now, the target that we're looking at to achieve as a business is around about 4%. So we're kind of there or thereabouts. We've still got a little bit of work to do to kind of get us below 4%. But the really important thing about this graph is looking at the trends. So if your revenue churn rate or your churn rate is slowly increasing over time, that obviously indicates there's something in the business that needs to be addressed, whether it's pricing strategy, we're not competitive in the market anymore. Maybe there's customer service issues, technical issues, and so on. So that's a really important trend for us to kind of measure. So now because we're measuring the churn rate and because we're aware of this new formula now, we can work out the customer lifetime value, again, broken down by month. Now, this, as you can see here, the lifetime value over the last 3 months for us is kind of trending down, which ultimately you think, that's not a good situation to be. You want the lifetime value to kind of go up. But one of the things I would recommend if you are going to do this is to build a rolling 3-month average graph based on this data as well, to smooth out those peaks and troughs so you can see what the proper trend is over time. Because we know ultimately in December and January, core volumes always go down for us anyway. So that's important to kind of track that over time. And lifetime value to CAC ratio, as kind of Kevin mentioned earlier on, the customer acquisition cost is a really important piece of the jigsaw for us. Two things for us to note about LTV to CAC ratio is, firstly, it should always be greater than 1, because if the cost to acquire a customer exceeds the amount of revenue you're going to earn from that customer over time, then you're growing broke. So you're getting new customers, but you're going broke at the same time. So that's something that needs to be avoided. And secondly, as Kevin pointed out, the LTV to CAC ratio should be in excess of 3 in order to have a sustainable and scalable business. So I know there's been lots of acronyms, terrible acronyms already in this presentation, but I'm going to create a new one. And Kevin, you're more than welcome to add this to the next edition of your book, which is TCAC, which is Target Customer Acquisition Cost. So if we know that the lifetime value needs to be at least 3 times higher than the CAC, then that also implies that the CAC for a scalable business needs to be 1/3 of the lifetime value. So we have another graph which shows, again, broken down by product, the maximum that we're willing to spend to acquire a customer for each one of these product lines. Now, this is the most important graph actually for our marketing team, because it dictates everything that they spend on their marketing, whether it's Google Ads or anything else. So that's how we use lifetime value in the business.
That is fantastic. Thank you very much, Jeremy.
You're welcome.
Right. So I think we can. That's a really good insight into how Jeremy uses it within his business. And Jeremy has a very data-driven business, as you can tell. Not all of us do. Those of us that do, great. There's lots of things that we might then apply and think about directly from what Jeremy's saying. But even if we're not got such a lot of data within our business, we can still take some of those key lessons and think about how do they apply and how could we use it within our business. I'm going to open up to questions in a moment. I think Emma asked a question earlier on in the chat around how do we calculate the gross margin or the contribution margin. As Jeremy said, we should be able to pull it out of our accounting, certainly at a macro level, but ideally if we've looked at our different service lines within our accounting package, we should be able to pull it out from there. But equally, Emma, you could think about it from a first principles point of view. So if you're going out and you're doing an exterior clean, say on a driveway or something like that, then how long does that take to do? What are the material costs, obviously, that have gone into it? They come straight out of it. But then also in terms of then the time and an hourly rate that you're paying your people to do that on will get you most of the way to getting a contribution margin that you could use to forecast and calculate things going forwards.
So it's like our break even, is it? What, like the running cost of the business sort of thing?
The gross margin is essentially so what you're trying to get to is off of the sales line. So you might have charged £100 for a job, right? But actually it's cost us 50 quid to do that job. Yeah. So the gross margin is 50%. And if that 50 quid is made up of £10 worth of soap and water, but £40 worth of labour, to actually direct labour to do that specific job, that's what I'm talking about there. So it's so for every 100 quid of revenue, if it's cost us 50 quid, it's the 50 quid that we should be using, or 50% if we're going to multiply ongoing. Granger, anything you wanted to add to the conversation on lifetime value?
The key thing for me, Jeremy, thank you very much. That was fascinating. I love the extension of the formula of how you can define to your marketing team how much they can actually spend on each product. So wow, that was brilliant. Thank you. But the key thing for me is not necessarily the maths. Okay, because some of us can get hung up on maths and find out everything else. It's just understanding what those formulas are saying, and that key lever that Kevin's talking about, making that balance greater than 3, and focusing on, your retention. How well is your customer retention? Focusing on the average value that you're getting from them. So it's looking at the formulas and thinking how you would use them to adjust that lever, rather than specifically getting focused in on the maths every single time. Though Jeremy's presentation showed that if you can then use it over a huge amount of data and get the data sets working for you, you can use it to a very successful degree. So thank you.
Brilliant. So, Matt, you were talking about lifetime value being great from a managed service provider kind of perspective.
Yeah, so from our perspective, once we're in, we're sort of in for at least 5 years usually, unless we make any catastrophic errors along the way. And generally clients, it's always know, like and trust. And as we're so integral part of many people's businesses, it's one of those that it's more of a pain to move away than anything else. And the amount of services that are provided makes us quite sticky as well, because it's a big headache to move. So we know that if we've got a client on for £1,000 a month, say, that we know over the lifetime of that, it's going to be, they're going to be worth tens of thousands of pounds. So if we've got if we had to pay, for a good example, we just started engaged with Gary regarding SEO, paying 500, 600, 700 pounds a month in SEO fees. And we get one client in, the potential is that's going to easily pay off the cost to acquire that business, whereas previously it's always been very much referral basis, but you can't depend on referral marketing to get you clients all the time.
Matt Busby, very different kind of business. What's your take on the lifetime value?
Yeah, it is very different because we're so heavily reliant on Google and Bing to sort of drive in our traffic, and we pay a lot for that. I should be on Google's Christmas card list with what I pay to them every year. But so it's really incumbent on us to try and get the second, the third, the fourth bite out of that customer. And being a sort of B2C sale, sometimes not so easy. So we have to look at other ways to go back to them, email marketing, e-shops and stuff like that, to try and get more out of it. Because if you're wholly reactive after that initial acquisition of the customer, you'll lose money, because an acquisition might cost us £7-8 per customer, and then unless you're going back and milking that every time, and being such a small order value that we have, unless you go back and get another couple of 3 bites at that cherry, you could lose each time you get a customer on. But then on our B2B stuff, where we're starting to make some headway on that, it's all about the customer segmentation. I think going out and getting that second bite at them, is knowing what to offer them, time of year, seasonal sort of stuff to offer them. So we've got 2 very different models that we have to do to get the value out of that initial acquisition.
Very good, yeah. And you mentioned an interesting point. If we all just focus on that initial transaction, then we can have a business model that's out of kilter, if you like, where the cost of acquiring that customer is too much relative to what we get back from that initial transaction. Whereas if we focus on some of the things that you were talking about, then hopefully we can increase that lifetime value. Richard Cox, you track your numbers a lot. What's your thoughts on lifetime value?
Well, I've just tried some stuff now, because I'm just coming from it from the last time I did it here. When you did the actual calculation, you come up with a ratio.
Yeah.
So then, of course, what's that ratio mean to you? Then if you start then tracking that back about from my point of view, so we've got services and we've got hardware. So we buy the hardware, but then we put that on our books and then we depreciate that over 6 years. So that hardware as a cost of goods comes off. The cost of goods gets depreciated on the bottom line. So the cost of goods gets reduced massively, from £1,000 divided by what's 5 years? 60?
About 60 months, yeah.
So obviously that's small. So what we then do is we also take the net percentage of a deal. So we obviously look at what our net percentage is of that deal overall and what our payback value is. So if the deal value costs us £1,000, then how quickly are we going to get that £1,000 back, and can we make that £1,000 up in pro services first?
Yeah.
So even though overall you look at the cost of acquisition of a customer, we're also looking at the deal value in itself. It then becomes volume, doesn't it? Because what's the volume that you can actually bring on board? And if you're looking at individual deals and volumes, assumably, hopefully, then the cost of acquisition then it will be correct. Albeit if you're spending then massive amount of money on marketing, but is the marketing worth actually getting those customers that you're talking about.
Right.
Which is
so
going to the recurring revenue.
Yes. So in principle, if you know that that for every pound you spend on acquiring a customer, you're going to get multiples of that pound back, whether it's £3 or £4 or more, then you kind of have you know that you can keep spending money on your marketing, essentially, because you know that you're going to get the money back in the long term. There is a caveat to that, which you might come to in a bit. But is that the sort of idea that you're meaning there, Rich? Yeah,
absolutely. And then it also becomes attrition, doesn't it? So it becomes attrition against those accounts, and are you tracking that attrition and the lost reasons?
Yeah.
So, you might have contracts. We put 3-year contracts, depreciate over 6, but we can then take that product and put it out again for another 3. But if you actually also track your attrition, it doesn't matter whether you've got a contract or not at the moment. If people are going out of business, then you're losing that. You're losing that contract anyway. So I think it's a good thing to do. But I also think that from our point of view, you need to be tracking all your numbers and figures in the background as well leading up to it. I don't think it's the be all and end all just to track the cost of acquisition against lifetime value, just as a ratio, and not knowing all the other things that's going on.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's more than one thing we need to be looking at, and there is a caveat with lifetime value in that, like, Matt was saying, you got 5 years worth, for example, average duration of a customer. So you'll get, if that's £12,000 a year, you'll get £60,000 over that 5 years. But if I said, oh, well, that means you could spend £20,000 acquiring that customer because you'll get 60,000 back over that time. Well, sort of okay, but you've got to spend that £20,000 now. You're not going to get the £60,000 straight away. You're going to get that over the 5-year period. So you've got to be really careful about thinking in that way. But it does give you another angle, another way of viewing things, and focuses on different aspects of what you would do with those customers. Okay, Peter, what would you add to this?
So I tried working out, and I think one of the things I found is that you've got to segment your clients up a little to do that, because you can have different kind of costs of acquisition and lifetime value depending on the size of the client. So we've got some big clients where kind of lifetime value is over 100k, and then we've got smaller clients where it's maybe 15k. So it's difficult to have one ratio that fits all your clients. You have to kind of segment them together to make that work. We found the cost of acquisition bit really difficult, partly because a lot of our jobs, as you know, are referrals. So it's very difficult to assign a value to the cost of acquisition for a referral, other than the actual cost of managing the sales process. So that was quite difficult. What we did do when we looked at it, and we were doing kind of telemarketing and some limited kind of advertising, is probably working out around £250 per client per lead, and we were having to get 3 leads to convert one into a new client. So from that basis, the figures were kind of reasonable. But it was without having to do that segmentation. They didn't kind of make sense initially.
Yeah. And I think it is one of those things that it should make us think about, is the segmentation. Exactly, because you're right. You will have quite different lifetime values depending on the particular segments. Okay, Gary, how about you?
Yeah, I suppose there's two sides really to our kind of business, and certainly we use cost per acquisition methodology a lot in terms of digital marketing side of the business for our clients. So as the guy said, it's important to know what potentially you could put towards a lead. I think it's quite surprising that a lot of businesses, it is quite difficult, or they maybe wouldn't know that the cost or the amount of money they'd be willing to put in for a lead, whether that's because it's very difficult to work out, or maybe it's because it's something that they've not ever thought about. But it's something we kind of push our clients for a lot. And once you do have that value and that figure, obviously you can see from a marketing point of view, whether you can scale it really. For us as a business, I think the key thing is it helps with forecasting really. So if we know kind of the lifetime value of a client, I think the most important thing for us is what we find handy is the forecasting side of it, really. If we know the value, how again can that scale into the future?
All right, good, thank you. Sam, what were your thoughts? Again, quite a different kind of business.
Yeah. Obviously, we're manufacturers and we're in the building trade, so this is very different for us. It's the first time I've read this, so it was a bit of trying to get my head around it and understanding it, sort of get the basics of it. But we've never advertised, so ours has always been word of mouth. So we haven't really got any costs on this field, to be fair. And we have Joe Blogs comes in that just does an extension that we won't ever see again. And then obviously we've got the main contractors that once you get in with them and they move around, you get into the next, when they move businesses, they give you new trade. But we have very few lifetime customers, if you know what I mean, where they keep going, because obviously the building trade, they run out of money or they close down, so I'm not quite sure how I can work ours out, actually. It's a bit, I need to read it and try and get my head around it a bit better. But this is completely new to me.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, and I think it's nice to see a formula and to calculate a number, but actually, what's really important, it's a bit like when we talk about doing a strategic plan. In a way, the plan isn't the most important thing; it's the thinking that it makes you do on the way to get there. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of those things, because whether or not it's appropriate to calculate the actual lifetime value and the actual customer acquisition cost, and therefore the ratio, it's the thinking. What does that make us think about doing? Does it make us think about how could we increase the average transaction value? How could we increase the frequency of purchase or the repeat purchase? How could we? What could we do along those lines, and a few other things as well. Okay, good. Stu, I haven't asked you yet.
It's something I'd never really thought about until I kind of read the document over sort of this week. Obviously, I changed my business model completely in the last year or so. So when I was a graphic designer, actually all my work came through referrals, and actually the lifetime client for the lifetime value of the client for me was somewhere between probably generally £3,000 to £5,000, £6,000. Some will be more, some will be quite a lot less, but it's probably a fair average, because everyone wants business cards, flyers, brochures, and then kind of you sort of repeats of those every year and tweaking those and all that kind of stuff. And I've only ever networked until very, very, very recently. So for me, it was just all a case of just how much is my BNI membership each year, and then I said. Was obviously now I'm much more on the consultancy side of things. I'm having to completely rework all of those numbers that I'd never really thought I had to do. But I think the one thing that no one's talked about yet is actually the cost of our time that it takes us to acquire something. So I do a lot of networking, which means actually, although my annual costs might be fairly low, the cost of my time to attend that meeting or those meetings each week, each month, whatever, and then the time to then nurture that client through the process is actually quite a lot. And how you value your time is kind of almost how long is a piece of string as well. So I think that's an interesting sort of figure to add into the mix, is actually not just how much does it physically cost me in terms of a financial number, but actually in terms of the time that it's taken me as well. Because also part of that is then actually how that then comes down to also, if I get an inquiry, how long does it take me to convert that into a lead? And obviously that is then having to reduce that. So actually something less time, therefore it's more profitable for me to do that. And that's stuff that I'm literally only starting to wrestle with in the last couple of weeks as I've begun to think about it.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that in, because it's absolutely right. The cost of our time is a key part of this. So if we're doing this, if we're calculating our customer acquisition cost correctly, then yes, we're including all of the direct costs that we might be spending out on advertising or memberships or whatever it might be that we're doing. But as Stu says, we're also including the time of our people, whether it's ourselves or whether it's, if we've got a marketing person or a salesperson, it's their time that goes in it as well. So the the simplest way to look at it, if we're looking at and we're looking at kind of at an overall level, is to tot up for a period, whether it's a month or a quarter or whatever period we're going to look at it, tot up all of the costs that we've had to spend out on that we would call marketing type costs. So yes, so any pay-per-click, any Google ads, any other kind of things that we're doing, plus all of the salary costs of anybody that's basically involved in marketing. And yes, if it's you, then what proportion of your time is involved in going out and doing that? And then dividing it by the number of customers that you've actually generated in that period. So if you did it for 3 months, how many new customers did you get over in 3 months? If you did it for the year and you're adding up all your costs over the whole year, how many new customers did you acquire for the year? And by doing that, you get the average cost for acquiring a customer, which is more complete. Faith, what do you do along these lines, thinking of lifetime value?
I guess similarly to some of the others, we have to segment our customer base. So actually, I would say that it's quite challenging to really be able to measure the lifetime value of some of our larger customers. And in fact, some of the lifetime value of those customers, we have to be very careful, doesn't actually become less profitable for our business, because the longer that you trade with them, I mean, some of our relationships are 20 plus years. So over time, you can get in a situation where actually what started out to be very profitable and very valuable customer can start to erode, and time passes and you don't necessarily realise. So we do sort of have to keep a bit of an eye on it from that perspective. Where I think it probably adds value and we don't really do it so well is at regional account level, so where we've got physical salespeople calling on customers. And then it's a much easier way to kind of attribute costs associated and to track the orders and the regularity. And as well as Rich said, also added into that, if they're dropping off and they're not reordering or that pattern's sort of changed. So we don't look at it in isolation, I guess, but we do sort of, in a way, it gets factored into, we look at a minimum margin expectation across both sets of or both types of customers as a business, and that obviously has to tie into our overheads, and a big part of that is FX for us, as you know.
All right.
So yeah, I think we do it a little bit, but I don't think it's necessarily something that drives our business in any way, like Gaz was saying, also with the other guys who've got that.
Yeah.
That type of business model.
And I think there is a difference. The idea of this calculation, this ratio, came really from the software as a service kind of models, the SaaS side of things, and particularly when you've got a recurring revenue type business where you can see every month how many new customers you've got on your monthly recurring revenue. You can calculate that. You can calculate churn rates. And therefore you can come up with this formula and you can come up with a number quite easily. Doing it for a business that's less based around recurring revenue is more challenging, because we've got to, estimate our lifetime value. If we've only been in business 3 years, and we've still got some of our customers from the very beginning, so clearly there's 3 years there, but that they could still stay for another 3 years or another 10 years so how do we, it's harder to work out the length of the relationship, but it's still useful to think about the key things. And I might just go through the formula in a minute just so we can pick out some of those. But any other comments or thoughts around lifetime value and CAC? Yes, Mel. Yeah, Sam's laughing at the CAC acronym, I think.
I think what springs to mind for me is that we acquire a new customer at a certain level of cost to the business.
Yeah.
We know that. But actually retaining them over a period of time is a different cost entirely, because, as businesses, we're experiencing increases in the cost to serve those actual customers that maybe we don't factor in when we're thinking about what the lifetime value. So the lifetime, if you calculate the lifetime value based on the cost to your business now, that's going to be very different to maybe the cost to your business in a year's time and the cost to your business in retention. And myself and Faith were talking about this in a recent meeting about, do we really fully understand the cost to serve our customer over a longer period of time? And I know that adds in another layer of complexity if you're just sitting down on day one and working out what that might look like. But that's where we need to bring in that kind of idea of, well, what do we think? And as Richard mentioned, it was that he finds it useful in terms of forecasting. So it's also forecasting what we think our costs are going to look like going forward as well, because of that period of retention as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's possibly where you're coming from, Faith, when you're saying that if over time you're having to spend more and more to serve that customer, then the profitability of that customer is going down. And that is part of the calculation, the thinking we need to have is what's the cost to, essentially what's the gross margin of that of the money that we're getting in. What's the contribution if it's costing us a lot to actually service that customer, then that drops our margin down from it, and therefore the lifetime value. Yeah, Louise, anything you'd like to bring in here?
Yeah, I think it's been really, really well covered. There's a couple of things I'd just like to link this to, which is, we have talked quite a lot in the past, and you find it on your Smart 90s every quarter is those cash acceleration strategies. And if you think about it, this is where it fits in perfectly, because we're looking at the sales cycle. So you've got that sales cycle, that sales and marketing cycle right at the very beginning. So it links in perfectly with the Smart 90 and the thinking around the cash acceleration strategies. So I just wanted to sort of make that link in our heads, because we can talk about what it means and how we calculate it and all the rest of things, but we actually need to spend a little bit of time going, okay, well, if we don't like what it's telling us, what are the mechanisms we can use to help us put that right? And that's one of them. And it just occurred to me as Mel was talking there, that also, the dream tool is fundamentally looking at exactly that thing. If you think about it, it's ditch, re-engage, expand, attain, maintain. Yeah. And you use that tool to help your thinking. The ditch in particular makes you think about, well, is this customer, we brought this customer on for the right reason in the first place. Nobody's questioning that. But actually over a period of time in the lifetime of it, has it become a drain on us? Has it now become something that we actually need to get rid of so that we can give that time and effort to somebody who will pay us better? So I just thought I'd make that link between those two tools at either end of the sort of spectrum.
Perfect.
And for those, just to quickly add, for those that are actually a product-based business as opposed to a service-based business, it's even more important when you're thinking about, the procurement of product as well, and whether you can use the Dream tool for that as well to understand whether those products are actually services as well, I suppose. But in terms of the conversations Faith and I have been having, about whether the lifetime value of that product is still relevant now. And should we actually still be bringing that product into the portfolio and offering that out to customers, because actually it's not worth it anymore.
Good. Excellent. David Lyons, do you want to, I'm going to pick on you because you were nodding. At least I think that means you know what we're talking about.
Well, I wasn't nodding, but obviously with the sector we're in, the product that we deliver, so a SaaS-based product, lifetime value, customer acquisition costs, churn rates, all those things are kind of, the common SaaS type metrics. And I look back at some of the original lifetime value customer acquisition stuff we did 4 years ago, Kevin. That was 4 years ago, believe it or not. And we've got an action currently to kind of update our company-wide metrics and what we're measuring and those sorts of things. I know we had a session and we talked about, the sort of dashboards and things like that we're using. So it's on my action list to kind of get that updated. We do keep an eye on churn rate and obviously our monthly recurring revenue numbers, and they're all kind of factors that feed into that lifetime value. We did obviously last year a price increase, so we looked carefully at customer spending trends, average customer spend, contract lengths, and again, they all feed into that lifetime value kind of number, which then obviously splits down to that ratio of X to X. I think last time we mapped it was something like 40 to 1 or something like that. So that kind of showed that we were in the phase where we could invest and could push sales and marketing. We weren't necessarily in that position. What it is today, I don't know. That's one of the two actions. We've got access to all the metrics that we need. We know what our churn rate is and spend and all those things, about just mapping that through. So this has kind of prompted a bit more of a push on that.
Very good. Excellent. Okay.
And they will form part of our kind of key numbers that we look at each month. So yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you. Steve, what about you? You're in a business again where there's quite a lot of recurring revenue. So what's your take on lifetime value?
Yeah, so we've got two sides. We've got the MSP side to the business, and then the software as a service side of it. Both categories are really quite integral to the customers, so we're pretty sticky, I'd say. Also, we try and get more than one product into the same customer to improve our stickiness. We've got a really high lifetime value for most of our customers, but as we take on bigger clients, they're more difficult to actually prize away from other customers.
Yeah.
So, for example, we're quoting for I think it's a 65-seat maintenance job over 3 sites. So, that's a reasonable size account for us. That's about the upper limit of the type of thing that we'd manage. So that would have a good lifetime value for us, but quite tricky to actually to get. In terms of our CAC, I guess, it's actually quite expensive, I guess, because not only have we got marketing costs, etc., we've also got the time to convert, and we're on about 5 days, I reckon, or 5 sessions to convert. So it's quite an expensive CAC, and at the minute we seem to be pretty CAC in our CAC.
Good.
Or our CAC, pretty CAC.
And I'm glad you raised that, because people sometimes make the mistake of thinking that the customer acquisition cost is really all just about their direct marketing expenditure, and they forget all the time that's in there as well. And yes, you should be exactly including all of that time it takes you, whether it's your time or one of your team's time, to be converting those sales. Yeah, good. Chris, what about you? Is this something that you've come across before? Is a concept new to you, or?
The CAC initials are my initials, so it's something that I've heard of before, not just because it's my initials, but it reminded me about it. I'm not, this will be a quick answer from me. We're not doing it. I want to do it. I want to do everything, as everyone said, slow down, do one thing at a time. So we're doing one thing at a time, which is really weird, and I'm not going to get distracted. But no, really happy with where we're progressing. I love this. This is brilliant. I have heard of it before, but haven't done it with the business. We have very long life cycle with our clients, typically many years. They tend to spend a lot of money, and we don't have many clients, which, from what I'm learning, is the worst business to build, to sell. We want lots of clients with small amounts of money. So I'm not sure where we go next, but yes.
Good. All right. Excellent. Dave Perigo.
Yeah, again, I suppose it's been more prevalent, or kind of at the head of my thought process recently, because we've gone for that acquisition. So in terms of what we pay for a specific amount of clients, I can see in pounds, shillings and pence really what my return on investment is and how many clients I need in terms of a break even. And as I said to you, Kevin, really, it's you go out and about, and for accountants, unless you do anything drastically wrong, you look after your clients, you should have kind of a long revenue stream of recurring revenue, really. So the more work you do up front, from a marketing point of view, it should pay off massively, really. But what I haven't factored in really is my time sometimes. So you're going out and you're having 3 or 4 emails, you're going out for coffee, then you're going out for dinner, then you're seeing the board of directors. It all adds up really into chargeable time. So in terms of our whole marketing strategy, it's something I'm incorporating now in terms of, what our return on investment is in marketing. That's very difficult to do. I'm spending money now with somebody to do some marketing, website marketing for us, and just trying to give them a kind of distinct return on investment is quite difficult, because it's all, subjective marketing, isn't it? Sometimes you fall lucky, sometimes you don't. So I've read the booklet this month, and it's generated some thought-provoking kind of thoughts, really, I must admit.
Good. Anything particular? Is it mainly around the marketing then you're saying?
Just the whole thing. I've sat down with the team and we've said this acquisition's got to work, guys, and we've got to make sure we've settled as many people down as possible. And I want to make sure we've got a break-even point of 2.5, 3 years. So, in terms of scoping that out, we know where we're at, how many clients we need, and how much we need to build them, really.
Yep. Very good. Excellent. Hey, Matt, what would you add?
I think very similar to the other guys that said that they don't measure very kind of empirically the cost of acquiring clients. I'm exactly in that same boat. I find it difficult to, because a lot of the cost will be my time. Yep. And the time for colleagues. I mean, we know very clearly what our marketing cost is because I employ somebody, for a set period of time, and I know the exact cost of that. But the other sort of elements of it in terms of how much time we spend in terms of going out to see prospective clients and then preparing and following up on costs. I don't have very much of a clue. Obviously, know very clearly what a customer value is to us, and I'm very happy that we've got some very long-standing clients. So I can work out down to the penny, how much value customers are to us, but not the flip side. And I'd like to find a really an easy way to account for my time and some of the general costs. So how do you take a proportion of the running costs of the business, and add that into the cost of acquiring clients? So I haven't really got my head around that.
Okay. The short answer to that is no. You don't put any overheads into this. This is it's you. So in terms of acquiring the customers, then it's all of your direct costs. So Google Ads and mail shots or whatever you're doing, plus any time that is taken up. So if you've got a person that is a full-time marketing person or a full-time salesperson, all of their salary should go into that. If you've got your time, which is maybe it's a day a week or whatever the equivalent is, then it's that proportion that you would ideally put in there as accurate as you can. Without what we don't want to do with any of these things, what we don't want to do is create so much work to get it down to the last decimal place that it's just not worth it. So you need to get the balance right. You need to be close enough without it being too onerous. In terms of then, so that's going into the customer acquisition cost. In terms of the lifetime value, what we should have in there is an element of not just the revenue, but the gross margin side of things, so the contribution. So again, if Dave was talking about servicing customers, so are you. If you have to spend a lot of time servicing those customers over the life of that time, what is the equivalent gross margin when you factor that in properly? And that should be the number that you use when you look, either multiply the revenue by that percentage or use that number to try and calculate that lifetime value. So you're not just kidding yourself that we get £10,000 in from that customer over a 3-year life cycle, but actually it's cost you £5,000 to service them. So really, you should be 5,000.
Sure.
Yeah. Good. Louise, any thoughts from you? We had a good discussion yesterday, didn't we, with another group?
We did have a really good discussion yesterday, and I'll add the same things actually into here as I did with the group yesterday, which is it's all very well talking about these things and having the information, but actually how do we make sure that we keep on top of them? And there's a couple of tools that you're already aware of and some of you are using. The first one is the idea behind the cash acceleration cycle and the cash acceleration strategies. In your Smart 90s, there's always that, what are we doing about cash acceleration this time around? And you can find, ways to improve and ways to measure within that. So there's the sales cycle where you're picking up the things that Kevin's just been talking about, the costs and the length of time and all of those things, and how to improve those internally, as well as getting the right customers and picking the right customers in the first place. And then there's obviously the delivery cycle, which links back into what Kevin was just talking about the servicing of customers. So that just linking it back into the Smart 90 and that thinking around the cash acceleration strategies and where you can find ways to improve it. The other thing is obviously the Dream tool, which encourages you on a regular basis, if you're using it properly, to actually look back through all of your customers, the current and the lapsed, and the ones you want to acquire, and think about, are they still giving you value? So when we're looking at the ditch, it's ditch, re-engage, expand, attain, maintain, if you remember. So if you're looking at the three existing ones, which is the ditch, expand, and maintain, there we're looking again at things like, are they still the right customer for us? Are we still getting the right margins from them? Have they become an absolute, and this came out yesterday in the smart board, have they become an absolute pain in the behind to service? So when you took them on, they were a great customer, but now they're just draining the life out of you. And it's a double whammy because they're costing you a lot of time to keep on top of. And if you got rid of that customer, for instance, and brought in somebody else, so you've got that opportunity then to get a better return from a new customer. So it's kind of like a double whammy. You're putting a lot of effort in to keep them, when actually you could put the same amount of effort into a new customer who will give you a better return. So it's just using those two tools to think about your customers and the value of your customers and whether you should be making a change. I think, Chris, we probably haven't introduced Dream to you as it is, but I learned a long time.
Yes. Has got this in it to do the customer.
Yeah.
I think I was going to bring up as my challenge, so I'm really interested in this. I'm writing it all in my goal.
Others have heard me say this before, but I learned a long time ago about not every customer is a good customer. And literally turned a business round from loss making to profit making by ditching their biggest customer. Wasn't quite that simple, but that was the cause of the problem.
Sounds good though. Say it like that.
Yeah. Good.
So that really was my input. Is just think about using those tools to help you focus on where you should be applying the pressure.
Yeah. Good. Any other thoughts, questions around lifetime value and customer acquisition cost?
You suggest that you map that almost like on a monthly basis and you have like a trend line, or would you be looking at yearly or quarterly? What would your suggestion be?
Yeah, very good question. And so the thing you'll find, particularly with fast growing businesses, where maybe we've not got millions of customers, right? That it can be quite sensitive to month by month changes. So in a business like yours, David, where you've got recurring revenue and you're looking at the churn rate, right? And you're essentially working out, what percentage of customers have you lost in that month, and you're using that as the denominator. So that's at the bottom, that's, you're dividing by that. So if it's 10%, you're dividing by 0.1. Well, if that changes to 5% in a month, then of course you're doubling the lifetime value of your customers. So it can be quite sensitive to month by month changes. So I would, in an ideal world, particularly with a recurring revenue type business, I'll come on to other businesses in a moment, particularly with recurring revenue type business, I would try and calculate it monthly. But I would also have a rolling quarterly number, and I'd have a rolling annual number. And I wouldn't make too many decisions based on the month by month movements, because it could go up and down too much and we might just be chasing red herrings. But I would take more notice of the trends, particularly in the quarterly and the annual side of things. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Good. So yeah, and just coming back onto the number itself, in certain industries, and particularly if you're looking at investment, so if you are a recurring revenue type model, whether it be software as a service or something on those lines, and you're looking for investment or potentially an acquisition to be acquired at some point, the more sophisticated an investor you get to, the more they will want to know these numbers inside out. Okay. And they'll also be asking you, let's just say in your case, David, you've got users. So you could have a churn rate based on the users that you've got in the system, but you've also got what's sometimes called logos. So you've got accounts, you've got home care companies or whatever else. So there's two types of churn rates you might have there. One is, have we just lost individuals because maybe that home instead have lost one or two clients, or have we lost a home instead? Have we lost a big one? And that's quite different. So you might want to think about those. But whether or not we've got that level of sophistication going, it doesn't always have to be about the number. It's what Louise was saying. It's the thinking that it makes you do. And I think one or two of you already said, just by looking at it and thinking about it, it makes you think a little bit differently. And formulae are great, and coming out with an exact ratio is brilliant. But actually, if it's just by going through the thinking makes you think, oh, you know what? One of the key things about increasing lifetime value is the average transaction value. How could we increase the average transaction value? Great. It's also the average number of times that they buy from us within a year or within a period. So how could we increase the frequency of purchase? And you can see how this ties back to some of those cash conversion cycle and the cash levers as well. And then, of course, yes, things like the retention period. So how can we increase the length of time that somebody does stay with us, or flip it on its head? How can we reduce the churn rate, the drop off rate? And if you just start to think like that, you think, okay, well, they're levers essentially that I can do something about each of those. I can have a little brainstorm, work out some tactics, do some things that we know, therefore will improve that. And similarly with the customer acquisition cost, one of the things that we haven't mentioned, it sort of was in one of your answers a minute ago, is the idea of segmentation, because we might find that both our lifetime value and our customer acquisition cost vary by customer groups or by different types of segments. And that might give us some clues that actually maybe we should be focusing more of our time in those particular segments. Or we need to, if we want to keep with that segment, maybe the customer acquisition cost is too high for us at the minute. How can we go about reducing that cost, either increasing our effectiveness or finding some way to reduce the actual cost to acquire those customers. So yeah, it's the thinking. It's like everything else that we talk about, really. It's the thinking that's the important bit, not necessarily the exact number to the nth decimal place, although there are times when that's can be really important, like when you're getting investment.
One final quick question. We're going down the route, or have gone down the route, of prepayments. So customers are prepaying their license fees for 12 months, 2 years, something like that.
Yeah. So
that obviously our customer acquisition cost is the same to gain that customer, but our revenue number jumps up because actually we've had the revenue for potentially 2 years in one big hit.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't happen every single month, so it's not like a constant. How would you model those changes into this ratio? Because the ratio is going to swing massively, because we might have, I don't know, £200,000 hit the bank of additional revenue for a customer account. And then obviously we've acquired that customer and we've had all that cost, but the ratios are going to be sort of wildly swinging.
Yeah. And is that a regular thing, something that happens?
It's becoming regular because that, from a cash point of view, cash is in our bank.
Yeah. And that's
so from a cash flow point of view.
Yeah. That's quite common, because with we've been sort of implying with your, certainly in my mind, with your revenue model, it's largely monthly recurring fees that we're looking at, but all of us potentially have annual recurring fees, or it might be people, exactly as you said there, they're on an annual or maybe even a biannual type contract, but it's still recurring. So we would need to include those in our numbers. Of course, one of the other advantages of that is that you've almost guaranteed that you're going to keep that customer for 2 years if they paid up front. So you need to model them in the same way. They will average out as your average transaction value when so number of customers that you've acquired, or the recurring revenue you've taken in divided by the number of customers. What it will do, as you say, is it will make your monthly much more lumpy, but your quarterly and your annual will smooth that out to a certain extent.
So you wouldn't try and create like a prorated rate and divide by, if it's spread over 2 years, spread that revenue over 2 years to smooth it out.
I don't think I would. I mean, I'd probably want to do it and look and see and decide whether or not that was the right way to do it. But then we're into just, in a way, we're making it even more complicated because we're just kind of, okay, well, are we going to spread that over 2 years? And I think it might. I think if it wasn't too difficult to do, then it might be worth comparing it and seeing. But I would certainly initially track it as it is. But no, when you're doing your review sessions on it and you're looking at the number, okay, look, we've had a couple of big ones in this month. Has it masked? I think the important thing would be if it's masking, if you're kidding yourself that it looks great, but actually you've lost quite a lot of monthly recurring customers. If it's masking that, then you need to certainly be aware of it. So,
Yeah, I was just going to add, because the key thing for me is trends and variance. This is a classic example of you will have a big variance, and as long as you understand the reason for it. So in other words, you'll pick it up and it'll be like, whoa, what happened there? And quite rightly, you'll be looking at it going, okay, well, that was the reason for that. And it's understanding that. I wouldn't say with Kevin, I wouldn't. There's a danger of trying to say, well, okay, we now know we've got this customer for 2 years, and let's spread it out over that time. That's looking into the future, and it might not happen.
Yeah, we do also bake minimums in now. So minimum. So we've got a minimum monthly contract value for 3 to 5 years, typically. Yeah. So that can be modelled. I wasn't necessarily looking at it from a forecast point of view, but it could be used as a forecast point of view, I guess. Yeah. But yeah, it was trying to, whether we smooth out those bumps or whether we show the bumps and then it's the quarterly and yearly, averages that give us the proper picture.
Yeah, and of course, you've just highlighted another question really around the lifetime value, because let's just say you mentioned 40 to 1, right? That's a phenomenal ratio, right? But let's just say that's the case. So that implies that for every pound you spend acquiring a customer, you're going to get £40 back over the lifetime of that customer, right? But let's just be extreme and say that £40. So we might say, oh, great. That means I could spend, let's spend 20 times the amount we're spending now. Let's spend 20 quid or whatever or let's spend 20 quid, because we know that it's going to be still worth 40, at least 40 if we get one of those customers, but hopefully we'll get more customers. Fine. But of course that £40 that you would get back over the lifetime could be over 40 years, but you're spending your 20 quid now.
Yeah. Cash.
Right? Yeah, so we had to be careful of that and keep that balance right. So it's not quite like saying, okay, well, we can spend what we like because we know that we get that return eventually. We've got to be careful. But equally, what you've just described there in the thinking can help, because you can say, okay, well, actually, how could we get back most of our acquisition cost in the first few months of that relationship with the client? So, could we get them to pay up front, for example, or could we get something a bit more chunky as that first transaction that they then go on to? So we've got most of our acquisition cost to acquire them paid back early up front, and then they're on to our long-term value that we get over time, and that essentially then becomes profit if we've managed to do that way. So it helps our thinking, I think, in that respect as well. All right.
Yep.
Good. And lots of the points that have been made, because it's some of this is obvious when you think about it, it's obvious that we'd like to keep a customer for as long as possible, and we'd like to get them paying regularly and a decent amount of money for as long as possible, right? But a lot of business models we see are where businesses focus on getting that initial sale, getting a new customer, getting that first sale, and then they're focusing on getting the next new customer. Whereas actually, and we all know it intuitively, if we spend a bit more time thinking about, okay, now we've got that customer, what could we do to improve the the value we're giving them, the length of time they therefore want to stay with us, and keep doing more and more with those customers, because of course that is a cheaper way of generating business than trying to find a brand new customer every time. Yeah, so it's kind of obvious, but actually, and it's kind of common sense, but it's one of those things that if common sense was so common, then we'd all be a lot better off. All right. Good.
Sorry, Kevin, can I just add a couple of things to that?
Yeah,
because we've been in that position for a number of times with the photocopying business. When you sell a photocopier and you lease it to somebody through an outside leasing company, you've got the option of building in service in with it as well. So clicks, for example, click costs. And we always encourage people to build the click costs or service into the deal, and the sales pitch to the customer is you can then fix your costs of cost per copy over the course of the contract. So we would get that whole service up front for 3 years, which it has two things, basically. It has two effects. So firstly, you get your money up front, and secondly, if someone else wants to come in and take over that contract, you've got to pay it out with service as well, and then that's extra profit in the deal. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is that we, with our software as a service, if we can get 12 months up front for the first 12 months to show that sort of commitment, then we also build that into the deal. But we do accrue that 12 months out equally over the 12 months to apportion the level of service, which then helps us do our costing of service against revenue. Even though we've had all of the revenue up front, we park it to one side and sort of drip feed it in. And the same when you cross a year end as well, the accountant will take that revenue out, so you're not paying tax on it. So you're deferring the tax on it as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's good points, and it's trying to make sure that you get the clearest picture that is the correct picture within the business, so that you can make the right decisions rather than having, as we said earlier, having things masked or you're making wrong conclusions because of it. Yeah, very good. And I think also what I heard there was that the starting point is, how do we, if we want somebody to commit to a 3-year contract, what's the value for them is the first thing. Why is it worth them doing it? Not, oh, it's great for us if we can do it, rub our hands in glee and whatever. But it's got to start with, what's the value to the client that might mean that they want to do that. But actually it fits in also with what we know from increasing the lifetime value and what's good for us. Yeah.
Kevin, just can I start with on that? So, retainer clients, and we often get them to commit to 3 years, and that's on a monthly basis, so it's X amount per month. But we do, just to sort of get the money in the bank kind of thing, we incentivize them if they want to pay and they're able to pay in one go for the next 12 months. We offer a 5% discount. I just wonder whether anybody else offers anything similar, or what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. Any thoughts?
With us, if we think the customer's got the cash reserves, we will offer it, because most customers would take it. So have a look at their accounts, see how much cash they're holding, and offer it if they've got loads of cash, because it's quite a good incentive.
Is that what you offer, Steve? Is it 5% or different?
Well, prompt settlement discount is traditionally 2.5%. But yeah, if you offer sort of 5%, I mean, you've got to look at it at the cost. That 5%, if you yourself have to borrow money, that 5% may be more or less. You'd need to do the numbers really, but 2.5% traditionally is prompt settlement discount. There's also some scam with the VAT as well, that you can deduct the VAT off the settlement discount, so there's less VAT in it. So if you're doing B2C, that might be an incentive for them as well. Dave will tell you more about that scam, I guess. It's not a scam, but
yeah, you can do things with your VAT. So yeah, again, it's don't forget though, because that if we're doing the lifetime value calculation, then you've got to then put that 5%, of course, discount into that lifetime value. So there's that implication. But on the flip side, which is the really good thing, of course, and the reason you're doing it is you're getting the money up front. So therefore, you're taking the risk out of that, as well as any inflationary costs on the on the living costs that we got at the minute. So what are we up to at the minute? What are the rate of inflation is at the minute?
10 point something, isn't it?
Yeah. So if you have the money now, or you have it in 2 years' time, it's worth a lot more money now potentially than it will be in 2 years' time anyway. Even if you've got the same amount of money spread over time, it's going to be worth more now. I hope you enjoyed that discussion. And if you're building and scaling your own business, you might well be interested in our book, The Entrepreneurial Scale-Up System. And it's exactly what it says on the tin. It's a practical handbook around scaling a business in a structured way. And you can order a copy on all your favorite online retailers, including an audio version, or you can find it and other supporting resources on our website, www.esusgroup.co.uk. That's esusgroup.co.uk, which is esusgroup.co.uk.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.